when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle, and a little bit of levity.
That's the question.
That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good morning, you're watching and listening to GB News. Coming up on the Political Correction, we're discussing the local elections which took place across the UK this week, Durham Police's decision to investigate whether Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer broke lockdown rules last year, as well as the election taking place in Hong Kong. That plus plenty more after the latest news.
Good morning, it's 10 a.m. I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. Sinn Féin's Vice President Michelle O'Neill says the party's victory ushers in a new era for Northern Ireland. The party won 27 seats in the election, overtaking the DUP, which dropped to 25. The results mark the first time that a nationalist or Republican party will form the largest grouping in Stormont. Secretary of State Brandon Lewis has called on the parties to form an executive as soon as possible. The region has been without a power-sharing executive for several months after the DUP refused to be involved in protest over the post-Brexit protocol agreement. Former First Minister and GB News presenter Arlene Foster says the result will not cause a significant shift in the political balance in Stormont.
Of course, it is a big moment in Northern Ireland's history. It's the first time that a Republican has been in the position to take the First Minister's post. However, we should not get carried away in terms of our place within the United Kingdom, because actually there has been no shift in terms of those who support the Union and those who support breaking away.
Senior Tories are accusing Sir Keir Starmer of hypocrisy as new details emerged into allegations that he broke lockdown rules last year. The Mail on Sunday has published a leaked memo which appears to suggest a beer and curry event attended by the Labour leader and his deputy Angela Rayner was pre-planned. Police in Durham are investigating. Sir Keir is resisting calls to resign despite previously saying the Prime Minister should step down over parties at number 10. Well, Boris Johnson says he'll deliver a so-called Super 7 of Brexit bills in the Queen's speech on Tuesday, which will cut red tape inherited from the EU. The Prime Minister told the Sunday Express the new laws range from data reform to financial services, allowing Britain to, quote, thrive as a modern, dynamic and independent country. He's also expected to unveil measures to help struggling town centres, including plans to force landlords to rent out empty shops and make pavement cafes a permanent fixture. President Zelensky says all 300 women, children and elderly people have been rescued from the Azovstal steelworks in Mariupol. He says the second stage of the evacuation will now focus on removing wounded members of the Ukrainian military. Civilians and fighters have been trapped for weeks in bunkers within the plant. It's been the last holdout for Ukrainian forces in the city against Russian attacks. The governor of Luhansk says at least 2 people have been killed after Russia bombed a school in a village in Ukraine. 60 remain buried under rubble and are feared dead. The governor says 90 were sheltering in the building at the time of the attack. The UK has confirmed a further £1.3 billion of military support for Ukraine. That's in addition to £1.5 billion already pledged to help the country, including around £400 million in humanitarian aid. The Prime Minister will meet other G7 leaders and President Zelensky virtually today to discuss Ukraine's long-term future. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get back to the political correction.
Good morning, you're watching and listening to GB News. This is The Political Correction. I'm Jenna Davison, and today I'm joined in the studio by Paul Embry and by our very own Arlene Foster in Northern Ireland. We're here for the next 2 hours to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge. This is not about journalists talking to journalists, it's about you telling us what you think. Coming up this hour, we are, of course, talking about the local elections which took place across the United Kingdom this week. We'll be discussing the decision from Durham Police to investigate whether Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer broke lockdown rules last year when he drank beer in an MP's office. We'll also be talking about grammar schools in the UK and recent comments from the Vice-Chancellor of Cambridge University that private schools should expect fewer students to be studying at Oxbridge in the coming years. And as ever, here on The Political Correction, we want to hear from you. So if you want to get involved in the conversation, then email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. This is The Political Correction. This Thursday, voters across the United Kingdom headed to the polls to cast their vote in crunch local elections. Following a tumultuous few weeks for all sides, with the cost of living crisis, Partygate and Beergate, many have viewed this set of elections as a verdict on Boris Johnson and his government, and indeed on Keir Starmer's Labour Party. With Labour making significant gains in London, including taking the flagship Westminster Council, and the Tories seeing a national loss of almost 500 seats. What do Thursday's results really say about the public's view of the current political lineup? And what can we expect for the near future? So, Paul, I want to come to you first on this. What did you make of it? Because it was a very strange set of results, I thought.
It was an unusual set of results. Awful for the Tories, uninspiring, I would say, for Labour. Lib Dems did OK, but the Lib Dems generally tend to do OK as a protest party in mid-term local elections and always argue that, again, they've broken the mould of British politics, and then when it comes to the general election, they tend to get wiped out in some of those areas that they've won. I mean, from Labour's point of view, I think it was worrying in some sense, I think, because there is a danger that Labour just becomes, the perception of Labour as a London-centric party effectively just becomes reinforced because they did win some of those fashionable districts in London, the Westminsters and the Wandsworths, and actually their net gains outside of London were minimal, really. And I think there is definitely a Brexit legacy there in terms of red wall seats. There was a bit of a swing to Labour, but nothing as significant as it would be if you were expecting Labour to win a general election. So I don't think any of the two major parties can really take any great heart. That said, I don't think necessarily it always points the way to how the next general election is going to be, but it does give us a snapshot of the general health of the parties.
And Arlene, what did you make of the results? Of course, we're going to talk in a lot more detail about the Northern Ireland results later in the show, but more broadly across the UK results, what was your take?
Well, I think, and I mean, this is the phrase we always use, it was a mixed bag. And I mean, when you look at the so-called red wall seats, I mean, there wasn't a crumbling there up for the Conservative Party. I think Paul's absolutely right about the London metropolitan area. I have to say, I know some councillors in London, some really hard-working Conservative councillors, and it really is dreadful that they lost their seat because not of something they did, but because of the perception of the party by voters in London. So I do feel, having been an elected representative myself, Diana, it is an awful thing to lose your seat, not for something you've done, not for the fact that you haven't worked hard, but because your leader has been involved in Partygate, so-called, and I know we're going to talk a little bit more about that in terms of what's happening in Labour as well. I think it was very interesting to look at Wales and Scotland. It's important for GB News to do that, because we always want to make sure that we're looking at all of the regions of the UK. In Wales, Labour had a very good day, and the Conservatives didn't. And I suppose that's the case in Scotland as well. SNP had a net gain of, I think, 22 seats, but Labour did very well and the Conservatives didn't. And I think that is a little worrying in terms of the SNP growth and who is going to challenge the SNP in terms of the continued calls for a referendum.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think it's just been interesting looking at, as you've kind of both have alluded to there, Labour did do very well in London, but when you look further afield, it was a much more mixed bag. I mean, there were losses in places like South Tyneside, which is kind of natural Labour territory. The Tories are making gains from Labour in places like Newcastle-under-Lyme, which is, a key place for some of these red wall seats, with I think 3 red wall MPs with their seats kind of within that council area. And yeah, you look across to the northwest and Cumberland, which I think, I don't think the Tories were necessarily expecting to do super well in, but actually to see the scale of the Labour victory there, I think was a bit of a shock to everyone. So I think it's just interesting, isn't it, seeing how this plays out in different regions. And I think one of the results that seemed to shock the sort of main kind of news channels when it came out was the fact that the Lib Dems took control in Hull being a Labour stronghold for such a long time. But, I spent a long time living in Hull, campaigning in Hull, and actually the Lib Dems have always been, run Labour quite close there. And it looks like there we are. There's visuals from the count in Hull, Marfleet ward being counted right there. But that was one that seemed to shock people, because I think what that demonstrated is that the Lib Dems do definitely seem to be on the rise again, don't they, Paul?
They do, but I wouldn't read too much into that because, as I say, people will often lend their vote to the Lib Dems mid-term, and they've got a reputation as being a protest party. And, as I say, when it comes to a general election, often they won't get those levels of support again. Labour has got a massive problem in provincial England, small-town England, those old heartlands of Labour in the North and the Midlands. That's Labour's real problem. And I think, there are many reasons for that. Brexit continues to be a huge factor. People in those communities, traditional Labour areas who voted Leave in huge numbers and then saw the party adopt this suicidal second referendum policy where they effectively went back to those people and said, look, you got it wrong, you're going to have to do it again. That was a fundamental breach of trust by the Labour Party in terms of how they treated some of their core supporters. And people clearly haven't forgotten that. People remember that in those areas. And there's a real question mark, I think, over whether Labour can win those areas again. I mean, Arlene says rightly that Labour did OK in Wales, but and in London as well, as we mentioned, of course. But provincial England, blue-collar England is the real problem for Labour. And I think the difficulty is, unless Labour sometime soon can demonstrate that actually there's some rapprochement with those areas, that actually those people have got a reason to trust the Labour Party again, then frankly it's difficult to see the Labour Party forming a government anytime soon. And as I say, the general impression now amongst traditional Labour supporters is that the party has become essentially a party for the professional and managerial classes, for our fashionable cities and our university towns, a party for graduates and Guardian readers. That is becoming embedded now, I think, in working class consciousness. And that, I think, poses a real existential problem almost for the Labour Party.
So kind of touching on that, we did see the turnout was quite low in these elections. We know that local election turnouts do tend to be substantially lower than general election turnouts. But Arlene, do you think some of that is just complete apathy by people? They're kind of sick of politics and sick of politicians across the board?
Yes, I do. And to pick up on Paul's point, it's not just apathy, it's alienation, actually. They don't want to vote for anybody. It's not that they don't want to vote. They would quite like to go out and vote for somebody that they identify with, but they can't find anybody who they identify with, so they say, no, I'm not going to vote. And that's very dangerous, because once people switch off politics, they become alienated, they don't want to engage, and really the whole bedrock of democracy, of people telling us what they think, is under threat. So I think people do really need to engage. And to go back to the Lib Dems and their success in various areas, I think they're good campaigners. They get out on the ground. They're always working, being hungry for votes, if you like, and knocking doors and trying to gain seats. And I think there's a bit of a lesson there for the two big parties, that they need to do more of that. They need to be more on the ground, and they need to be out there searching for those votes and speaking to people and listening to what they have to say. Because as politicians, you do have to very much listen to what people say. Yes, you have to lead, but you also need to bring people with you. So to do that, you have to listen to what they have to say.
I think that's completely true, and you're right. The Lib Dems are very good local campaigners. I know a few of sort of my locals say they're like Japanese knotweed. Once they get in local elections, they're almost impossible to get rid of.
They're pretty dirty street fighters as well, aren't they? Let's be honest.
Yes, they are.
Completely, but I think it is a threat to the main parties. Obviously, local election voting, as you said, Paul, can often be used as a bit of a protest. So it's a bit different to general elections. But I do think both main parties are seeing them as a bit of a threat moving forward, don't you think?
No, I don't think they are particularly. I think the Lib Dems lost a lot of support amongst what you would call their core base when they went into a coalition government with the Tories between 2010 and 2015. I think they alienated what would be a lot of their core, particularly their youth vote, and I think they're still struggling to a certain degree to win that back. I have to say, I've never really understood what they're for. I've been... It varies
from place to place, I think.
Well, exactly. I think, they pitch in different ways to different communities, and I think they're probably quite opportunistic in that regard. But I don't see it. As I said at the outset, they are always talking about breaking the mould of British politics. Whenever they have a bit of a bounce in local elections, they're always saying there's now a realignment of British politics. There are now three main parties. I don't really think these local elections are really much different to those periods gone by. But certainly there is a big problem, I think, for the two main parties. The Tories have got massive problems over the cost of living crisis, how that's acutely affecting people at the moment, the trust issue around, the whole Partygate thing, which we'll come on to. I detect within the Labour movement there are two factions, if you like, the radical left, the Corbynites, and the centrists, the Blairites, each of whom are arguing and pointing at each other and saying, we told you so, but actually both groups, I think, are fundamentally wrong in their appraisal of what's wrong with the Labour Party at the moment, what direction it needs to take in order to reconnect with working class communities. So it's interesting times. I think there's a general lack of trust, actually, in British politics. I think between ordinary communities and the political establishment, I think there is a real disconnect, and that's not good and it's not healthy.
Well, not at all. Well, we've spoken about the Lib Dems, but of course there was another party that we're celebrating on Thursday, and that is the Green Party, who made some fairly significant gains across the country. And joining us to discuss this now is Councillor Andrew Cooper, a Green Party councillor from Kirklees in West Yorkshire. Andrew, welcome to the show and thank you for joining us. Just explain to us first what happened in Kirklees, and then we'll come on to the broader national picture.
Well, I got re-elected with... no, I didn't get re-elected. My colleague got re-elected with 60% of the vote. We've won every local election in our ward for the last 20 elections. So once Greens do get elected, we stay elected. And so that was great. And, getting 60% of the vote again, marvellous.
Mm-hmm. But looking more broadly across the country, remind me how many gains the party got?
Well, we've got up to 542 councillors. A few years ago, we had 175. So it's been a rapid rise. It's been a sustained rise, but it's also been a rise which is geographically spread across the country. So it's not just one or two areas where we're strong. We've built up our campaigning capability to be able to deliver gains across the country.
So you seem to do particularly well kind of in the south of England in this set of local elections anyway. Why do you think that is? Why are people moving away from other parties?
Yes, we did well in the south, and yes, we took seats from the Conservatives, but we also took seats from Labour. You look up in Tyneside, South Tyneside, we took seats there. We've taken seats in North Yorkshire. We've now got a councillor group of 5 on the new North Yorkshire Council. We gained 3 seats in Bradford. We gained a seat in Leeds. We've had a net gain of 1, taking our councils up to 14 in Sheffield. So it's not just simply the south; it's right across the country. 8 councillors were elected for the first time in Wales for the Green Party. So big gains across the country.
So one of the things I'm genuinely curious about, Andrew, is do you think it's people getting fully behind the sort of Green Party agenda, or do you think much of it is they're just fed up with the other parties?
No, I mean, if they were fed up with the other parties, there are other places to go to. You mentioned the Lib Dems earlier on. They could have gone to the Lib Dems. But because we were there, because we were campaigning, because we were actually talking about the issues that people cared about, we're linking the local environment, the things that people care about on a day-to-day basis with global issues, that links into what people care about. And people are recognising that some of the answers to the cost of living crisis are actually some of the issues to do with the climate crisis. So if we're going to insulate homes to save energy, that also helps people save money, but also helps the global environment as well.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. Well, Andrew, I've completely forgotten the other question I was going to ask you then. It was a good one, I'm sure it was. Arlene, Paul, anything that you want to ask, Andrew?
I mean, I was just say to Andrew, I mean, Andrew, what is the Green Party for? I mean, I don't mean that flippantly, but there was a time when the Greens were more prominent in the 80s and the 90s, specifically because, arguably, they were the only party at the time who were arguing strongly for environmental issues, weren't they? But because of the popularity of that cause, all of the other main parties now have adopted that agenda. So in what way now is the Green Party in any way distinct from most other parties?
Clearly, the fact that people are voting for the Green Party in large numbers and electing as councillors across the country, clearly then they're seeing that the agenda, the green agenda, as you might call it, is not being significantly adopted by other parties, and that they want more action and greater action. And the Green Party can deliver that. And we're involved in the administrations of over 14 councils in the country so far, but that's going to rise over following this election.
So, Andrew, there's been talk, hasn't there, of potential kind of pacts among some of the more sort of left-leaning parties. Is that something that you've seen any evidence of around the country?
Well, I suppose the real difficulty here is the Labour Party. The Labour Party doesn't play well with others. It's their idea of beating the Tories is saying everybody vote for us. They don't actually want to a lot of the time work across the political agenda, and that's a huge problem for them. If they really want to see the end of the Tories, they've got to recognise that other parties exist, that people vote for them, and that really, if there are going to be arrangements in the future, they've got to respect those other parties and respect their voters.
Of kind of pacts happening either in your neck of the woods or kind of elsewhere involving the Green Party and Labour and maybe the Lib Dems?
No, not to any significant degree, and that's largely due to the approach parties take. So that has meant the Green Party, despite the electoral system, is having to up its game and win more seats. So we're more than happy to try and take votes from all parties, Conservative, Labour, whoever, to get our agenda across.
Brilliant. Well, Andrew, thank you for joining us this morning. Andrew Cooper there, Green Party councillor from Kirklees. But don't go anywhere, because coming up after the break, we're talking about grammar schools in the UK. We'll also be looking into the decision from Durham Police to investigate Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer. And as ever, we want to hear from you. So if you want to get involved today, then email us on gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. This is A Political Correction.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle, and a little bit of levity.
That's the question.
That's two questions, actually. That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to The Political Correction, and as always, loads of you have been getting in touch with us today, sharing your views. Paul?
Yeah, Adrian says, I would venture the bookmakers have the result of the next election spot on. The Conservatives will find it difficult to obtain a majority if they keep losing seats in London, and Labour can't win if they are just a London party.
Arlene?
Yes, and Gary says that he agrees with Paul. Labour's Brexit policy was suicidal. You got it wrong. Let's try again. And who was the chief in charge of that Labour policy? Sir Keir Starmer. How can anyone trust him ever again?
On that note, we've had John written in who says, the hypocritical Starmer and his comments are getting worse by the day. I was a Labour voter until Starmer, and most of his cabinet refused to accept a democratic vote on Brexit. And his latest hypocritical actions mean I, for one, will never vote Labour again.
I mean, that is certainly a problem when you go. I mean, obviously, I'm active in the Labour movement, and when you speak to people in those communities, there is an absolute. I mean, I would say in some respects a visceral hatred of the Labour Party, which never existed previously in those communities, even among those people who didn't necessarily vote Labour. But that was a fundamental breach of trust, I think, that it is going to take years and years potentially to recover. And it's true that Starmer was certainly the architect of that second referendum policy. Dee says, the Tories lost my vote because of their appalling backstabbing of their leader. Don't care about pathetic Partygate. Cost of living is all over the world. Don't blame the government.
And Arlene?
Yeah, and just reflecting on Paul's point there, one of our colleagues, Gloria De Piero, said that the Labour Party should think about apologising for what they've done in relation to Brexit if they're trying to get those voters back. So that's an interesting point she made. So, just to go back on Aidan, he's saying that the Green agenda is geared up solely to destroy the West and Western economies. I'm not sure that our last guest would agree with that, Deanna.
I'm not sure he would. And then finally, we've had David write in who says, the people of this country are being let down by Westminster. The political elite demonstrate time after time they're not fit for purpose and betray decent, honest, hard-working people with the way they portray themselves. I've resigned myself to the fact that mainstream politics are toxic and will never vote for a mainstream party again. I'm sorry to hear that, David, but I'll do all I can to try and convince you. But do keep your views coming in. Get in touch with us on gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. Now, despite Labour seeing such significant victories, taking Westminster, Wandsworth and Barnet councils in London, there have been some outliers from this week's electoral outcome. Harrow Council, just next door to Barnet, actually saw the Conservative Party make a net gain of 8 councillors, seeing them take overall control of the council from Labour. With the national picture looking quite different, why were the Tories so successful in Harrow? And why do elections often see anomalies like these? Well, to discuss this further, we're delighted to say we're joined by the MP for Harrow East, Bob Blackman. Bob, thank you for joining us on the show this morning.
Good morning.
So, explain to us what happened in Harrow.
Well, it's very simple. We've been preparing for these elections for more than 2 years. And in fact, when Sadiq Khan was re-elected as Mayor of London, if we'd have had our Harrow Council elections on the same basis, we'd have actually taken 45 out of the 55 seats available. So we've been working very solidly on local issues that matter to people, whether it's fly tipping, the state of the pavements and roads, and the policies that Sadiq Khan has implemented across London of multi-storey high-density flats really went down very badly with Labour voters. We were making clear that we're going to transform the borough in terms of cleanliness, stopping tall buildings, and indeed restoring civic pride to the area. And the worst aspect, I have to say, of Harrow Council's performance has been their treatment of council taxpayers. We have the second highest council tax in London, but people get dreadful service as a result. I mean, you can't contact the council. You hang on the phone for 45 minutes if you're a customer of the council and still don't get answered. They don't answer emails. And the reality was that the final straw for them was £2 million of council taxpayers' money going missing under an alleged fraudulent deal between a contractor and council officers. And that, of course, was the final straw for Labour when it came to Thursday's result. But I have to say, it's been a fantastic result in Harrow. We've worked our socks off, and I've got a pretty good suntan for being on the streets. And Arlene was saying about how the major parties need to get out on the streets and talk to people. We do that week in, week out. Every Saturday, every Sunday, we're out knocking on doors, talking to people, finding out what they care about, and ensuring that we deliver for them. Now, Partygate, which you haven't talked about since I've been listening, did come up on the doorsteps originally. But by the end of the campaign, it was irrelevant, and people were caring about who runs Harrow and who can deliver. I mean, I'm delighted that, frankly, in my constituency of Harrow East, 20 out of 23 councillors are now Conservatives. And my good lady wife came top of the poll in a so-called safe Labour area in Edgware. So it demonstrates that you can do it, provided you get out there and do the work and listen to what the voters actually want.
Thanks, Bob. And just so you guys at home are aware, Bob is renowned in the Conservative Party for being one of the sort of top campaigning MPs. But one of the things, Bob, that I'm really curious...
jealous.
One of the things I'm very curious about, though, Bob, is why such disparity in the results in London? Because Barnet, of course, right next door, had a completely different experience. What do you think went wrong there?
Well, I think the problem for Barnet, and listen, I don't want to intrude on colleagues, but obviously in 2018, we had a brilliant result in Barnet because, frankly, of Jeremy Corbyn and the anti-Semitism that was rife in the Labour Party. I think most people put that down to the problems that the Labour experienced there last time. We've had boundary changes in both Harrow and Barnet. In Barnet, the boundary changes disadvantaged the Conservative Party because of the way the wards were split up. But bear in mind, in Enfield, which is the next door borough, we also gained 8 seats, coming from a low base. And I suspect, we haven't got the results yet, but I suspect we're going to be making gains in Croydon, where, of course, we've won the mayoralty. So although in London it's been a dismal picture in terms of Wandsworth, Westminster, and obviously Barnet, the key here is that it's not all doom and gloom in London for the Conservative Party, far from it. In the outer London boroughs, you're seeing the Conservative Party and, to an extent, the Liberal Democrats making advances. And that demonstrates that London is becoming a very much more divided city across the region. In fact, actually, I always say Harrow is not in the city of London. We are in the Greater London area, but actually we're an outer London borough on the edge of London and on the edge of Hertfordshire and beyond. So I think that we have to look at those results and see what actually happened and where people got the votes from. I think what the most important thing for us now is to demonstrate visible change in Harrow, and I think you'll see visible change in Croydon and beyond. So the results are mixed, and I think we've got to be clear about it. Certainly for the Conservative Party, we've always had this totemic view of Westminster and Wandsworth demonstrating that everything's okay in London when things weren't going so well. Now we've got to actually look at say, well, actually, do you know what? We can win and we can do well in areas provided we campaign on the issues that people care about.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Bob. And I think Arlene has a question for you.
Yeah, Bob, and congratulations. We were watching very closely what was going on in London, and just in respect of that, I mean, you said that you worked very hard on the ground with your local candidates. I know Theresa Villiers quite well, and I know that she would have been doing exactly the same and campaigning very hard. So how can you show a place like Barnet next door that actually having that Conservative run council can make the difference, and show that they should come back in that direction, because I think Barnet was quite a fall in terms of Conservative candidates.
It was, but you've got to remember that a lot of those seats in Barnet were very marginal and actually only lost by very narrow margins. So there's clearly an opportunity to come back and come back strongly. I think even the Labour leader of the Barnet Council now was saying it wasn't a great love of Labour that got them there. It was disillusionment with the Conservatives. So I think from that perspective, I do think in local elections you've got to campaign on the issues that matter. And by the way, Arlene, I was leader of Brent Council in 1994 when we bucked the trend then. There are only 5 councils in London which we won. London Borough of Brent was one of them. So you can do it, provided you stick to those local issues that people really care about. You know, their streets and their bins and their council tax really does chime when you get that message across to people that that's what they're voting about.
Mm-hmm. Well, Bob, thank you so much for joining us. And I think the key lesson that we've taken away today is to get you on our campaign team up in Bishop Auckland, because by the sounds of things, you've had some incredible successes against the odds over the years. Thank you for sharing your experiences.
Yeah, that's what it's all about. That's what it's all about, campaigning. Always be campaigning. The next election, by the way, has started already.
Yes, it started from day one, I think. Bob Blackman there joining us, MP for Harrow East. Now, the Bank of England has this week warned that the UK economy may well slip into recession this year, as escalating energy costs force inflation to 10% or higher, and interest rates are raised to their highest level since 2009. With sterling taking a hit, as well as stark warnings from the Bank of England saying it's unable to prevent UK households from becoming worse off, and escalating economic issues over in the United States, what will the consequences be for people up and down the UK, and how do we fix the problems? Well, joining us now to try and answer some of those questions is Chief Economic Strategist at Net Wealth, Dr. Gerard Lyons. Dr. Lyons, thank you for joining us this morning. What was your take after the Bank of England's announcement earlier this week?
Well, it wasn't a surprise that the Bank of England raised interest rates to 1%. The reality is that the Bank of England has been very slow to react. Last year, they were easing policy, keeping rates at record low levels and actually printing money through quantitative easing when they should have been hiking. So what they're now doing is almost trying to make up for lost time. I think the real issue from last Thursday was the reality that even though everyone is focusing on the cost of living crisis, and quite rightly so now, while inflation is the current problem, as we move through the year, the economy is set to slow sharply, is already weakening, and therefore recessionary fears will come to the fore. And what that means is that the Bank of England last Thursday, in my personal opinion, should have thought twice before raising rates, and they should think twice about raising interest rates again. Even though interest rates are very low, and even though the direction is for rates to go higher, it's about the timing, and it's about the strategy, and it's about the ability of the economy to cope. So in answer to your question, we've got a cost of living crisis now. The Bank of England was too slow to act last year, but we're about to face a big economic problem on the downside, which requires further action, further help from the government, as well as maybe the Bank of England going slow as we move through the rest of the year.
Well, Dr. Lyons, let's stick on interest rates for a moment, because this rise, it's a relatively small rise, but as we said, it's the highest rate we've had in quite some time. What is that going to mean for individuals, but also what is it going to mean for the country as a whole?
Well, interest rates are still at very low levels. They're only 1%. Inflation is currently 7%, and it's set to go above 10%. So to put this in perspective, back in the 1970s, and sometimes when we've had inflation problems elsewhere, often interest rates have to go up to above the rate of inflation to really put it back into shape and pull it down. Obviously, the economy would go crashing into a recession if we were to put interest rates up to those sorts of levels. But interest rates basically do have to go higher. As I was saying earlier, I think we need to be careful about the timing. What does it mean? It makes it dearer to borrow. It makes it more expensive to pay off your debts, to pay off your mortgage, although many people are on fixed mortgages. But more particularly, it's not only the direct effect, it's the indirect effect, because banks and others will now anticipate higher borrowing costs in the future, and that will make it more difficult for some firms to access credit, and it might make banks more reluctant to lend. So the only way really to bring inflation down is through tighter policy that squeezes the economy and that makes it much more difficult for people and for firms.
Thanks, Dr. Lyons. Paul?
Gerard, there's a problem, isn't there? And you've touched on it. We have an already slowing economy. And what does higher interest rates mean for that? What does it mean for unemployment? What does it mean for growth? What does it mean for investment? It's potentially going to have serious downsides in respect of all those things. And isn't the truth that actually the interest rate rise isn't going to have any serious impacts on some of the drivers of inflation at the moment in terms of the energy crisis, energy prices, for example, and reasons for that, and supply side issues, etc., with the reopening of the economy after the pandemic. So actually the downsides could well outweigh any upsides, couldn't they?
Well, that's right, Paul. In terms of the cost of living crisis, there's three components to it. Higher inflation itself, rising energy prices, although those two are interlinked, and higher tax rates as well. Now, in terms of addressing inflation, if it's a supply side shock, i.e. because of higher energy prices feeding through, the central bank, the Bank of England, will probably feel it can't do much. What it's trying to do is dampen down the so-called second round effects, trying to dampen down demand in the economy, therefore discouraging firms from passing on higher costs, discouraging firms from raising prices. And in terms, as we heard a few months ago from the Governor of the Bank of England, trying to discourage people from asking for higher wages, although naturally they will. But in answer to your question, yes, Paul, because of where the inflation shock has come from, and also because of the Bank of England was off the ball and wrong last year, not taking action when they should have done, their action now is not going to really address the problem. And if it is to address the problem, they have to put rates up so high, it really squeezes the economy too hard. And that's the real challenge. That even though we're talking about an inflation problem now, it's going to be quite clear in 1 or 2 or 3 months that we're going to be talking about a growth problem with the economy slowing. Now, thankfully, the jobs market is still pretty healthy. But as we move through the year, it might start to become a bit softer. That is, firms not employing people, maybe unfortunately people being made redundant. So we're at a very difficult turning point for the economy. And while we're focusing on the Bank of England here, the focus has to also be on the Chancellor for him to actually do more. And it's not only a UK challenge, it's a challenge in many other countries. So we don't only need to look at the Bank of England, and as we've touched on, they're actually taking a path that's not so good for the economy. The Chancellor needs to step in and do actually more to try and alleviate the problems.
Well, thank you for joining us this morning, Dr. Gerard Lyons, Chief Economic Strategist at NetWealth. And don't go anywhere, because coming up after the break, we're talking about the election in Hong Kong, which took place this weekend, grammar schools in the UK, as well as recent comments by the Vice-Chancellor of Cambridge University. And as ever, here on The Political Correction, we want to hear from you. So if you want to get involved today, then email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. See you soon.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's 2 questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you, or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to The Political Correction. And as ever, loads of you have been getting in touch with us today. We've got Barry here who says the local elections are always used as a protest vote, and also only 20% of people voted in most areas, including mine. I think on average it was a little bit higher, around about 30%, but even so, still a pretty shocking state of affairs. Paul.
And Aidan says Labour decided post-Blair to abandon their base electorate, formerly known as the working class, in order to attract the so-called educated London East to vote. They now have it stitched up, and we've said goodbye to being in power for 20 years. I'm going to read the next one on behalf of Arlene, because she'll be far too modest to read it herself, I'm sure. This is Stephen, says, Arlene is spot on as usual. I stopped voting in 2019 after 50 years without a miss. No leaders can be trusted. Manifestos are meaningless. The current socialist government, if only the current socialist government are a prime example.
Arlene, over to you.
Yeah, so we have Lee. He says that the problem is all the mainstream parties are the same, too woke and completely out of touch. And until we do away with the first-past-the-post system, nothing will change. A real shake-up is needed. And then Darren says, this is a good one, I admire Stormer Johnson and Ed Davey like Robert Shaw admired the shark in Jaws. Jaws, I was going to say Jaws.
Oh, my gosh. Definitely Jaws. Well, Darren, thanks for that one. And thank you all for getting in touch. And do keep your views coming in on GB Views at gbnews.uk or tweeting us at gbnews. Now, John Lee Kachu, the sole candidate for Hong Kong's leadership election, has been confirmed as the city's next chief executive, securing 1,416 of 1,424 valid votes cast over the weekend, amounting to a staggering 99.4% of all ballots. In his victory speech, Lee said he would continue to uphold the rule of law and protect Hong Kong from internal and external threats. Well, joining us now to discuss this is Rana Mitter, Professor of History and Politics of Modern China. Rana, thank you for joining us this morning. I think the first thing that is a little bit surprising is how small that electorate is. Can you just explain how the electoral system worked in this election?
Yes, absolutely, Diana. Basically, this is a selectorate rather than electorate. In other words, the 1,424 people you've mentioned are business people. They're people who are very close, in many cases, to the Beijing government, the government of the Chinese Communist Party at the center of the country. And they are basically tasked with choosing the chief executive through a system of working out who would essentially be able to liaise best between Hong Kong and the mainland. In other words, it's not, obviously, it's not like our local elections here in the UK just a couple of days ago, but it's also not like the more generalized elections which Hong Kong has for local councils, a bit like our elections, but now those have also been changed so that only candidates who are approved of by the Communist Party can take part. So it was always going to be what's called a closed circle, very small election, more like a leadership election in Britain than a general election.
Thank you. Paul?
Rana, we've seen some of the issues around Chinese rule in Hong Kong and some of the issues around free speech and dissent, etc. More broadly on China, how expansive do you think China intends to be? I mean, we've seen, obviously, the Belt and Road Initiative. We've seen China exerting more influence geopolitically. What, in your view as an expert, is China's end game here?
I think you could think about it, Paul, as concentric circles. In other words, in its immediate backyard, in Hong Kong itself, which of course is part of the People's Republic of China, although until a couple of years ago it was given a lot of leeway in terms of press and media freedoms, and those have been heavily reduced under the national security law that was passed there 2 years ago. In those sorts of areas, I think there's no doubt that the government of Xi Jinping, the current Chinese president and party general secretary, is keen to try and narrow the freedoms and the ability of media and other organizations to speak out. And in the Asia-Pacific region, I think China seeks to become both the biggest commercial and military actor in that area. Once get into circles beyond that, the Middle East, Sub-Saharan Africa, even Latin America, areas where China has big economic interests, I think they're interested in being influential, but they're more likely to use tactics such as basically bringing cheap and effective 5G technology, which of course China would then have the technological control over in terms of maintenance and obviously in terms of being able to know what goes in and out of the system. So, a military Chinese presence in South America, for instance, seems to be quite unlikely. A growth of the Chinese military in the South China Sea, basically off China's coast, where it does want to expand its influence, that's much more likely.
Would you say, therefore, it's all about soft power at the moment with China, or do you think militarily that actually it is the threat that some people in the White House and others are suggesting it might be?
The biggest thrust, I think, is in terms of commerce. If you look at the way in which the Asia-Pacific region, some now call it the Indo-Pacific region to include South Asia, sits in the world economic system, particularly at a time of global recession, as Jerry Lyons was just saying a few moments ago, in fact, on your show. Well, that is, of course, where the action's going to be, and restarting the Chinese economy after COVID is the key aim. If you're going to do that, you have to have big trade links with your neighbors, with the Southeast Asia region and beyond that as well. China's currently making a lot of efforts there, but it knows that too much military posturing is going to make people nervous about that connection. It's actually interesting that the UK potentially has a role here, because later this year, this country, the UK, is likely to join the Comprehensive Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, which will actually give the UK a real chance to have some kind of economic role in the region, and obviously working out how to engage with China, where there's going to be cooperation, where there's going to be competition. That'll be an important part of that discussion, which Britain will really need to have a conversation about.
Arlene?
Yeah, I just want to go back to Hong Kong again. I was privileged to visit Hong Kong on a number of occasions before the crackdown, and how it was such a beacon of innovation and entrepreneurship. And I just want to ask you, Anna, about this gentleman who's been appointed really as the chief executive of Hong Kong, because he is a security officer. He's somebody that was involved in the crackdown. And he'd been sanctioned by the United States of America, I understand, for his role in relation to that. So how is that going to speak to the world about Hong Kong's place within the world?
Well, Arlene, it's a good question. I'd sum it up by saying that in terms of democratic freedoms and freedom of media, we will see those, I think, under John Lee continue to narrow. They won't be completely wiped out, because China does want to maintain the system, or the message of one country, two systems, which they put forward. So there'll still be some free speech in Hong Kong, but frankly, much less than there was 2 or 3 years ago. But on economics, they're going to push really hard, I think, under John Lee's administration, to make it clear that China is a place of innovation. Just across the border from Hong Kong, literally, is the city of Shenzhen, which has grown from nothing to millions in 30, 40 years. That is one of China's 3 big tech hubs. And the message, I think, is that Hong Kong will be the financial center, also the place where international commercial law, British style, continues to operate, even though freedom of speech is restrained. And that money will be pushed into the tech sector across the border, which will be really crucial for particular technologies that are going to be crucial to us in the next 10 to 20 years for net zero. And by that, I mean things like the batteries for electric vehicles. So actually, we'll be hearing a lot more about the Shenzhen Hong Kong tech and finance hub, even here in the UK, in the next few years to come.
Well, Professor Mitter, thank you for joining us on the show this morning. Professor Ronna Mitter, Professor of History and Politics of Modern China. Now, a Conservative MP this week has come out and declared his support to see the ban on new grammar schools scrapped, saying it's the next step for levelling up the country. Jonathan Gullis, who represents the Redwall seat of Stoke-on-Trent North, wrote in The Times that grammar schools are the best way to allow children from less privileged backgrounds to make the most of their abilities, rather than relying on chance. The debate over whether to bring back selective state education has been ongoing ever since the Labour government scrapped them in 1998. So should we lift the ban on grammar schools, or are they a remnant of a bygone era? Arlene, I'm going to come to you first, because you are a former grammar school girl.
I am indeed the only member of my family to go to a grammar school and then go on to university. I'm a huge believer in grammar schools. We, of course, have grammar schools in Northern Ireland, although Sinn Féin are vehemently opposed to grammar schools. So we'll see what happens in relation to that. Grammar schools, for me, are about social mobility. They allow children who are able to sit the tests and go on to then move through society. And I am a great believer in them, because as far as I can see in England, there are some very good schools. when you're beside a good school, the postcodes become very desirable. The prices of houses go up. And actually, what you're doing is actually selecting children in a different way. And you're actually not getting people from a working class background into those very good schools. So I actually believe that grammar schools are a good answer. Of course, you do have to be able to encourage the families to send their children to those grammar schools, because sometimes there's in the mind, would their children fit into these grammar schools and what have you. So grammar schools need to reach out to children in working class areas, and that's something I was very keen to see happening in some of the areas of Belfast where there were working class areas beside some of our best grammar schools, but yet those children weren't progressing in. So there is something that needs to be done to allow social mobility to happen, but I firmly believe that grammar schools are very much part of the solution.
Paul, what's your take?
I don't like the 11 plus. I think it's a pretty brutal instrument, but there is no question. I think the evidence supports it that grammar schools did certainly allow a number of working class kids to get the sort of education that they wouldn't otherwise have got. And I think it's arguable to say that the abolition, I say the abolition, some of them still remain obviously, of grammar schools has allowed private schools to flourish to a certain degree. And I do think we have problems at the moment with social mobility. I mean, I don't necessarily think the return to the 11 plus is what's going to solve those problems, but the social mobility issues since the downgrading of grammar schools, I think, is certainly a problem. I also think, Arlene had a point in terms of, you know, the comprehensive system is not without selection. We need to be honest about that. But what we have effectively is selection by wealth, as Arlene touched on, selection by the ability of parents to be able to move into an affluent catchment area where there happens to be a top comprehensive school. And I have real arguments with my colleagues on the left over this, because I think people on the left are riddled with hypocrisy. You see some senior figures on the left who wax lyrical about the comprehensive system and really preach the gospel about it, but actually buy themselves, buy their own kids out of the system, whether that's by someone like Diane Abbott sending their child to a private school, or whether it's by, as I say, moving into an expensive catchment area so they can go to a top state school. So, yeah, I have to say I'm not entirely sure what the answer is, but social mobility has gone backwards, and we need a serious debate about why that's happened and how we're going to give working class kids the kind of outlets that they did have once to attain the sort of education that they wouldn't otherwise have got because their families didn't have the money.
Yeah, I want to touch on that point there about private schools, Paul, because another thing that's come out that's sort of linked today is from Oxbridge, isn't it, with the Vice-Chancellor of Cambridge saying that in future we can expect fewer private school pupils to get places in Oxbridge because they're moving towards allowing more sort of state school kids in by changing it to some sort of multiplier or something when they apply. Do you think that's the right approach?
Well, I mean, I have to say, I really don't like any kind of social engineering as a rule. I'm a great believer that actually if you've got talent, if you've got ability, then regardless of your background, regardless of the colour of your skin, your religion, whatever, you should be allowed to reach the top without anybody putting artificial obstacles in your way. Now, that doesn't mean, of course, that we shouldn't try to remove the very real kind of socio-economic obstacles that are often placed in the way of working class kids, but I don't necessarily think that punishing kids whose parents happen to be richer is the way to do that. So I'm instinctively uncomfortable with stuff like that, even though I'm passionately in favour of working class kids getting more of a chance in life.
I think it's not just parents being richer either. I mean, I did go to a private school, but I was on a full scholarship. You know, we were probably one of the poorest kids in the school, really, looking at sort of my family's wealth. But actually, that could have meant that then I was disadvantaged when applying to university, despite, you know, being from a very sort of low socioeconomic background. So it's a bit bizarre. Arlene, what's your stance on that?
Yeah, no, I have to agree with Paul on this and yourself. I don't like this sort of, you're from, it's almost like a quota system. We can only take so many kids from private schools and we have to make room for kids coming from the comprehensive sector. And I really instinctively am against quotas. It's one of the reasons why when I heard Oliver Dowden say last week that we need half our MPs to be female, I was, how is that going to happen? If it happens by encouraging more women to come forward and to make sure that they have all of the support systems, yeah, that's great. But if it's by quotas and shortlists, no, I'm not interested in that, because that actually says that women are somehow lesser. And again, I think it's wrong to punish children who go to private schools just because their parents have placed them in that private school.
Well, that is about it for the first hour of the Political Correction, but we want to hear from you, so send us your views. Do you think grammar schools should be coming back? Get in touch with us, email us on gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at GBNews. But don't go anywhere, we've got an hour left on the Political Correction.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you, or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good morning, you're watching and listening to GB News. Coming up on the Political Correction, we're discussing the elections in Northern Ireland, Emmanuel Macron being sworn in for his second term as French president, and Roe versus Wade over in the United States. That plus plenty more after the latest news.
It's 11 a.m. I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. Sinn Féin's Vice President, Michelle O'Neill, says the party's victory ushers in a new era for Northern Ireland. The party won 27 seats in the election, overtaking the DUP, which dropped to 25. Secretary of State Brandon Lewis has called on the parties to form a power-sharing executive as soon as possible. The region has been without one for several months after the DUP refused to be involved in protest over the post-Brexit protocol agreement. Former First Minister and GB News presenter Arlene Foster says the result will not cause a significant shift in the political balance.
Of course, it is a big moment in Northern Ireland's history. It's the first time that a Republican has been in the position to take the First Minister's post. However, we should not get carried away in terms of our place within the United Kingdom, because actually there has been no shift in terms of those who support the union and those who support breaking away.
Senior Tories are accusing Sir Keir Starmer of hypocrisy as new details emerged into allegations that he broke lockdown rules last year. The Mail on Sunday has published a leaked memo which appears to suggest a beer and curry event attended by the Labour leader and his deputy Angela Rayner was pre-planned. Police in Durham are investigating. Sir Keir is resisting calls to resign, despite previously saying the Prime Minister should step down over parties held at number 10 Downing Street. The Prime Minister says he'll deliver a so-called Super 7 of Brexit bills in the Queen's speech on Tuesday, which will cut red tape inherited from the EU. Boris Johnson told the Sunday Express the new laws range from data reform to financial services, allowing Britain to, quote, thrive as a modern, dynamic and independent country. He's also expected to unveil measures to help struggling town centres, including plans to force landlords to rent out empty shops and make pavement cafes a permanent fixture. The Home Office is reviewing its security after protesters heckled Priti Patel at the Tory spring dinner in Nottinghamshire.
And I actually just want to start...
Priti Patel, your racist policies are killing people.
7 activists from the Green New Deal Rising group bought tickets to the event and then criticised government plans to send migrants to Rwanda. They accused the Home Secretary of racist and inhumane policies. Some of those at the dinner booed the activists, who were quickly led away. President Zelensky says all 300 women, children and elderly people have been rescued from the Azovstal steelworks in Mariupol. He says the second stage of the evacuation will now focus on removing wounded members of the Ukrainian military. Civilians and fighters have been trapped for weeks in bunkers within the plant. It's been the last holdout for Ukrainian forces in the city against Russian attacks. Well, President Zelensky says evil has been reborn 77 years after victory over Nazi Germany. Speaking ahead of Moscow's annual celebrations to mark the day, the president said Russia has desecrated the memory of those who fought in World War II. He also says Russia cannot hide from its responsibility for invading Ukraine.
We haven't withstood even a century. Our never again lasted for only 77 years. We missed the evil. It was reborn, again and now. This is understood by all countries and nations who support Ukraine today. And despite the new mask of the beast, they recognise him, because unlike some, they remember what our ancestors fought for and against.
The governor of Luhansk says at least 2 people have been killed after Russia bombed a school in the village of Bilohorivka in Ukraine. 60 remain buried under rubble and are feared dead. The governor says 90 were sheltering in the building at the time of the attack. Hong Kong has elected its new chief executive. John Lee, the sole candidate, was endorsed for the city's top job by a pro-Beijing committee. Lee said it was his, quote, historic mission to lead a new chapter for Hong Kong. The former Secretary for Security was responsible for implementing China's national security law to arrest pro-democracy demonstrators and shut liberal media outlets. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get back to the political correction.
Good morning, you're watching and listening to GB News, and this is The Political Correction. We're here for the next hour to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge. Coming up this hour, Sinn Féin has become the first nationalist party to win the most seats in the Northern Ireland Assembly in its 101-year history. We discuss what this means for the future of the Union. And over in France, Emmanuel Macron has been sworn in for his second term as president. We're joined in the studio by a French journalist to discuss the day and the reaction. And we discussed Roe versus Wade after a leaked document showed a majority of US Supreme Court justices plan to support overturning the historic case that legalised abortion. But we want to hear from you, so if you want to get involved in the conversation and have your message read out on air, then email us on gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. This is The Political Correction. Sinn Féin have, for the first time, become the largest party in the Northern Ireland Assembly, after Alliance and others made significant gains, splitting the Unionist vote and forcing the DUP into second place. These results mean Sinn Féin can now nominate a First Minister to lead the Northern Ireland Executive. But under the power-sharing terms of the Belfast Agreement, a First Minister cannot be in place without a deputy. And DUP leader Sir Geoffrey Donaldson has said he will not nominate any ministers unless there are significant changes to the Northern Ireland Protocol. So what do these results mean for Northern Ireland, the Protocol, and indeed the Union itself? Arlene, I'm going to throw to you here first, because what was your reaction at seeing the results?
Well, I wasn't entirely surprised, Deanna. Right throughout the election campaign, the polls had been predicting that Sinn Féin would be the largest party by quite a measure. I think the last poll that came out the week of the election had the DUP on 18% and the Sinn Féin way ahead on 25-26%. As it happened, the DUP fell to 23%. And Sinn Féin didn't gain any more seats. They retained their 27 seats. But the DUP dropped to 25. So I think what you're seeing here is a realignment on the nationalist side, because the SDLP lost 4 seats. Unionism overall lost 3 seats. So actually, it's more a case of as you were in terms of the blocks within Northern Ireland of unionism, nationalism. But the big story is actually the growth of what's called the others. And the others, of course, are the Alliance Party, the sister party of the Lib Dems in Northern Ireland, vehemently pro-European. And they gained, they actually more than doubled their number of seats in the Northern Ireland Assembly. They were on 8 seats, they're now on 17 seats. So that's a huge increase for the Alliance Party. But as regards unionism and nationalism, in terms of the percentage poll, it's as you were. And you rightly pointed out that whilst Michelle O'Neill can now be nominated as First Minister by her party, she will not become First Minister unless and until the Democratic Unionist Party decide to put in a Deputy First Minister alongside. And they have made it very clear that until the protocol is dealt with, a protocol which is causing societal and economic damage to Northern Ireland, until it's sorted out by the United Kingdom government, then there won't be an executive in Northern Ireland. So I think we're probably heading in to a period of talks, Deanna. Wonderful for the people of Northern Ireland, because we've spent a long time in talks processes over the years. And we shouldn't forget, of course, in case you're going to ask me, oh, it would be terrible if the DUP didn't go into government at this time. But of course, that's what happened for 3 years when I was First Minister. The Deputy First Minister, Michelle O'Neill, refused to nominate, and we were without government for 3 years.
Arlene, to what extent do you think Sinn Féin, the Sinn Féin brand, has been detoxified? Because, I mean, the days of Adams and McGuinness in charge are obviously over. The 2 main figures now, Michelle O'Neill and Mary Lou McDonald, north and south of the border, young women. Are there lots of young people, particularly, who don't know or don't particularly care about what Sinn Féin used to be in terms of its links with the IRA? And is that why Sinn Féin have now improved their performance so dramatically, both north and south of the border, of course?
I think they've spent a lot of time on trying to detoxify, Paul. I think that's absolutely right. They have tried to get rid of some of their ex-combatants, as they call them, from elected position. If you take my seat here in Fermanagh and South Tyrone, where we had Sean Lynch, who was the ex-IRA commander in the Maze prison, as one of their MLAs, he stepped aside before the election. However, Sinn Féin still hold the position that what happened during the Troubles was justified. And people shouldn't forget that. If Mary Lou McDonald or Michelle O'Neill was on this programme now and they were asked about what the IRA carried out right across the United Kingdom, not just in Northern Ireland, they would say that it was justified at the time. And I think people need to remember that, because they haven't moved away from what was a horrendous campaign of terrorism and violence. That is still very much there. But you're right to say that they have tried to detoxify themselves, particularly to younger voters. And younger voters in the Republic of Ireland are quoted as saying, well, we really don't care about what happened in the past. We're only interested in the fact that they're promising to deal with the housing crisis in the Republic. They're promising to deal with the cost of living crisis. So that's why they're gaining that support. But of course, in Northern Ireland, Paul, it's slightly different, because in a mandatory coalition, they can only be in power as such if all of the other parties are in power with them, because we have a different system of devolution than Scotland and Wales. And I think sometimes people on the mainland forget that that is the case.
Arlene, one of the things that I'm really curious about is, personally, what has it been like for you seeing the DUP slip into second place?
Well, of course, I I left the DUP in a way that I didn't think I'd be leaving the DUP, Deanna, because I was forced out of my position in and around this time last year, of course. But when I came to this election, I was very much of the opinion that it was only the DUP who could stop Sinn Féin becoming the largest party. Therefore, I did campaign with some of my friends and colleagues within the DUP to try and give them a boost to get elected, because frankly, the election was bigger than personalities or indeed individuals, and that's the view that I took. But it is disappointing. Obviously, I'm not going to say it's not disappointing. It is disappointing to see unionism in terms of its largest party being in second place. But I think what we need to recall is that if you look at the vote overall, unionism is still ahead, and we actually have more unionist representatives, albeit independents, there in the Assembly than nationalism has. So yes, it's a mixed bag, but I think people shouldn't get carried away in terms of Northern Ireland's place within the United Kingdom, because firmly, and this election has shown it again, pro-unionist parties, pro-unionist votes are still ahead of nationalism, and I think that's the message that I wanted to get across today.
Well, joining us now live from Stormont is GB News' Northern Ireland reporter Doogie Beattie. Doogie, what's the mood like in Stormont?
Well, Stormont, tomorrow the parties are due to meet here and try and, I suppose, form a government. As we've been hearing there, that is not going to happen. We can imagine that there will be quite a long while before we will see any sort of government here. But looking at this election and looking at exactly what happened and breaking it down, I mean, we studied constituencies such as Strangford. We made reports on it, and that's why I was looking at them. It has 4 unionist quotas, and it returned 3 unionists. North Antrim and East Antrim is exactly the same. 4 unionist quotas, it returned 3. The management of the vote and the splitting of the vote is what has really done the damage here. 27 seats Sinn Féin left here with, they return with 27 seats. Their electoral machine is amazing. Any political party across the UK would love to study what they did. I mean, we were working with statisticians over the weekend, and I was being told, look at Michelle O'Neill's vote there. She ran 3 in her constituency. She came back with 20.1% of the vote. Her 2 running mates, 15.9% of the vote each. Remember, their votes transfer. That is absolutely stunning. And as a reporter, to see that, how they get the maximum out of these transferable votes. Unionism doesn't seem so good at sort of training their electorate. In fact, if anything, it's been because they have always been the largest party here that they've thought that that headroom is there. I think this will be a huge wake-up for unionism in Northern Ireland. I think they will start to work a lot more together. I mean, the DUP lost about 66,000 votes. I think if you go to Jim Allister's inbox, there was about 65,000 votes there. He's, of course, the traditional unionist voice. They were anti-protocol. So there is a lot of stuff to study around this. And for someone like me who loves this type of thing, it is quite exciting to study. I mean, back in 2003, one of the political commentators here, when the DUP overtook the Ulster Unionist Party and Sinn Féin passed the Social Democratic and Labour Party, he had said within 18 years we would be seeing basically 2 parties and a middle ground. Well, I think that's pretty much, this election has proved that that is now on the way. And it means that every party here must go into vote management. It must get its message across. And that message, unlike Enoch Powell said back in the day, you could have put a Union Jack on a donkey and got it elected. Same thing would have applied to a tricolour. That means that these parties will have to start producing more of what it means to nitty-gritty. Cost of living, health and education.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Doogie, for those insights. Doogie Beattie there joining us live from Stormont to discuss the results that we've seen in the Northern Ireland elections. Yesterday, French President Emmanuel Macron was sworn into office for a second term after defeating rival Marine Le Pen. In his speech, Macron spoke of the need to innovate at a time of unprecedented challenges for the world. Well, joining us now to discuss the mood in France and what we can expect as Macron embarks on his second term is French journalist and broadcaster Nabila Ramdani. Nabila, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Not at all. I think the most interesting thing about the sort of swearing in was it wasn't very sort of pompous and grand like you'd usually see in France. Why was that?
Well, absolutely. It was very low-key. It was a very low-key inauguration for the obvious reasons that it was Macron's second term in office, and he wasn't effectively taking over from anybody. So, you know, new presidents usually enjoy a lot of pomp and circumstance. There's usually a procession up the Champs-Élysées and lots of grandstanding, but not this year. Remember, Macron is the first president in 20 years to get a second term in office, and he wanted to convey the sense of business as usual. And so he made a 10-minute speech. It was a very humble one, and he pledged that he wanted to serve the French people, and he used the word to act a lot. So he urged everybody, in fact, to act to deal with emergencies such as the climate crisis or indeed the war in Ukraine. And the French president is, of course, the head of the armed forces. So there was a 21-gun salute, but that was it, really. There was no such thing as events that were planned and no crowds that could gather during the day either to cheer him on or indeed to protest against him. And instead there was a lot of booing and whistling at him when he attended the French football final cup on Saturday evening. But there was a lot of trouble on May the 1st when May Day rioters caused an awful lot of rampage in Paris and indeed in cities across France. And you can expect a lot more of that in the next 5 years. Remember, too, that it will be Macron's last 5 years because French presidents can only serve 2 terms. But I can assure you we can expect to see Marine Le Pen standing for election in 2017. So that's quite ironic.
The divisions that led to the rise of Le Pen and the Front National, and I'm talking particularly about that part of France, if you like, the left behinds, the type of communities that voted for Brexit in Britain, people affected in a negative way by globalisation. I mean, the Gilets jaunes, obviously, probably the embodiment of that. Those problems haven't gone away, have they? Do you see over the next 5 years Macron bringing people together, or do you think France is going to become more polarised?
Well, he did pledge that he wanted to unite France, but there's already...
All leaders pledge that, don't they? Actually doing it is the key, isn't it?
There's already a lot of criticism. People haven't forgotten about, the fact that France is racked with division. He's still labelled as a president of the rich. He's seen as very smooth with the rich middle classes, for example. I mean, the second terms is usually when politicians get their hands dirty as well. So you can expect Macron to push through some very unpopular reforms. For example, he wants to increase the retirement age from 62 to 65. He also wants to reduce the cost of employing people for businesses, so threatening workers' rights and making it easier to remove some of their privileges, especially for state workers. And this will, of course, lead to a lot more unrest. And already people are annoyed that he's pledged money for Ukraine, for example, when French people are complaining about the cost of living and similar issues.
I think one of the things I'm kind of curious about is obviously Macron has been quite anti-Britain in recent years, clearly not a fan of us leaving the European Union. But do you expect, now that he doesn't kind of need to appeal to an electorate, that those tensions will increase, or do you think he might tone it down and we might have a more constructive relationship?
Well, I think we can expect a lot of friction still, but it is hoped that there will be a more grown-up relationship between Britain and France. There were lots of unpleasant word exchange on both sides, and some of the issues will remain, not least of all over Brexit. Remember, Macron called it a crime very early on, and issues such as fishing rights for French people in the English Channel will remain, and the issue of small migrant boats also across the Channel. But it is hoped that there will be a more mature and indeed grown-up relationship where serious matters can be resolved.
One of the talking points, I think, of France is the collapse of the left, Nabila. I mean, do you see any signs on the horizon that there's going to be a resurgence soon or ever? Because, I mean, they've really fallen apart, the left in France, haven't they?
Well, they have absolutely collapsed, and what has absolutely been noticeable in the last election is the collapse of the traditional mainstream parties, the traditional Gaullist conservatives and indeed the left. But there are parliamentary elections coming up in June, and Macron, whatever your views about him, he's a canny politician. and you can be sure that he will bring people around him. He's already proved during his first term in office that he can build cross-party coalitions. So he doesn't care about loyalty. He cares about, he will argue that he wants what's best for France. So he'll draw in people from across the political spectrum to secure a governing majority and push his reforms through. The only people he won't collaborate with or work with are the far right. Marine Le Pen currently has 6 MPs in the French Parliament. Éric Zemmour has none. He's unlikely to secure anybody. But he's quite happy to work with people across the political spectrum. Remember that his own Prime Minister is an elected civil servant at the moment, Jean Castex, and the former Socialist Prime Minister Manuel Valls has already said that he was quite willing to work with him. So that's what we can expect, a very practical and pragmatic president who will govern with the people who are happy to work with.
Brilliant. Well, Nabila, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insights again this morning. Nabila Ramdani there joining us, French journalist, to discuss the recent swearing-in of Emmanuel Macron. But coming up after the break, we're discussing the decision from Durham Police to investigate Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer. We want to hear from you, so don't go anywhere.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's 2 questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christys.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christys, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Welcome back to The Political Correction, and thank you for so many of you for getting in touch with us. We've got Karen here who says Arlene, as usual, is on point. Grammar schools are a massive loss to England's working class children and damage the area by pushing up property prices. Again, politics is getting in the way of children's education. Quotas are wrong as they create tokens. Merit only, please.
Yeah, on the same subject, Alexander says it's just bonkers not to allow privately educated kids into the university. I work 2 jobs and deprive myself of some luxuries because I want my kids in private schools to get the best education and get a good platform in life. I did not get this treatment from my parents, but am determined to give it to my kids. So why should I and they be punished by not allowing them into Oxford, etc.?
Arlene?
Yeah, so again, Linda says, I'm a big supporter of grammar schools and they should be in every area. That's the way to benefit lower income households. I think we've had a lot of response to the grammar school story today. I think that's really interesting, actually, Diana.
Completely agreed. Oh, Paul, we've got a nice one for you here from Kevin. Is it your brother or your dad? He's a bit in touch, said Paul Embry must be the union movement's best ambassador. If he were in the majority, the unions would be a help to the country as opposed to a hindrance. I'm not sure you'd agree with that last bit, would you?
No, but the rest is fine. Thanks, Kevin. The check's in the post. Peter says, I failed the 11 plus in the 60s. I have dyslexia, which wasn't known about at the time. I felt I was thrown out onto the rubbish heap and lost all my school friends and confidence. Today is a different world and there is help available.
Brilliant. Well, thank you guys for sending in your views and keep them coming because we always want to hear from you. Now, this week, it was revealed that Durham police are investigating whether Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer broke lockdown rules during a visit to an MP's office last year. An initial decision that no offence had occurred was reversed when the force received, quote, significant new information. Speaking on Friday, Sir Keir said that the police have got to do their job and should be allowed to get on with it. Paul, I'm going to start with you because I think one of the key things we've discussed is what usually gets politicians is hypocrisy, isn't it? And, I mean, certainly from my perspective, Sir Keir is guilty of hypocrisy on a vast level, isn't he?
Well, I mean, potentially. I think we need to see how it plays out in terms of the Durham police investigation, which they're obviously revisiting. I just think, Deanna, we're in a pretty mad situation as a country where, on the one hand, the Prime Minister is coming under enormous pressure from the opposition to resign as a result of a cake, and on the other hand, it's likely possibly that the leader of the opposition is going to come under enormous pressure from the government to resign because of a curry. And you kind of think, how did we find ourselves in such a bizarre situation?
It's like the thick of it, isn't it? But in real life.
Well, it almost is. I mean, it's almost beyond parody. And, you know, the truth is we find ourselves in the position because, in my view, Parliament pushed through legislation and restrictions which I think were fundamentally extreme in the first place. And I think now we're seeing some of that play out in terms of what it means when you shine a microscope on it or put the microscope to it. On one level, my view is, look, as politicians, you really deserve everything you get on this because you did enact those laws, which meant that people couldn't go to funerals of loved ones, couldn't be by their loved ones when they were dying, couldn't get married and all of that sort of thing. So the nature of those restrictions you pushed through were such that you can't complain if people are now scrutinising your own actions in terms of what you did. But I have to say a greater part of me thinks this topic is now so utterly tedious. It's become such a Westminster bubble story. I think calls on Johnson to resign were legitimate, but I think it's now become a total Westminster bubble story. And people out there, you know, the man on the Clapham omnibus, the woman on the Clapham omnibus is thinking, I've got a cost of living crisis. I'm struggling to heat my home potentially. I don't know if I'm going to be able to pay the mortgage at the end of the month. I don't give a fig about curries and cakes. Move on.
I think linked to that, you know, talking about kind of out there outside the Westminster bubble, the Times have reported today that the Beergate investigation will take up to 6 detectives for between 4 and 6 weeks, and they'll make use of a major incident room. When people can't get a visit from a police officer because their shed's been broken into or they've been burgled or whatever it might be, Arlene, I mean, this is a massive waste of police time in a way, isn't it?
It is, but you see, the problem is they have to investigate now because of what happened to the Prime Minister. And I always said that this was a complete non-story and we should move on and deal with the issues that Paul has just referred to. But once you start down the road, there has to be equity between both sides. If evidence is produced that there has been a breach by the Labour leader, then that has to be investigated. And you're right, a complete and utter waste of police time and resources when they could be dealing with things that really matter to the community. But I said last week, he who comes to equity must come with clean hands. It now appears that there's evidence there. It'll have to be investigated. But my goodness, what a waste of time. And if he does get a fixed penalty notice, what is he going to do? Because he called on the Prime Minister to resign. Is he going to resign? That then leads into a whole major crises within the Labour Party. Who's going to replace him? Because Angela Rayner may also get a fixed penalty notice. I mean, it's become a complete farce. And I was thinking about this the other day because one of my children's doing history GCSE at the moment. And I was thinking, how in the future will this be looked at by students of history? Will they understand it? It's going to be completely mad. But anyway, that's where we are. And I think it'll have to now be investigated and, as we say, waste a lot of police time.
Well, on Partygate, we talked about the Prime Minister's fate and who may sort of succeed him. But there's talk that Sir Keir Starmer may kind of be forced to resign. So, quick fire. Arlene, who do you think would be the next best leader for Labour after Keir?
Well, I'm not well positioned at all to speak about that because everybody thought Angela Rayner would be the successor. And of course, if she gets a fixed penalty notice as well, she'll not be able to take his place. I would say Paul's much better placed to decide on that one.
Go on then, Paul. Who would you like to see?
You were going to say a much better place to be the leader, Arlene.
Well, according to some of our GBNews, I think people would like to see that.
I mean, I think the way that the fixed penalty notices are being thrown around like confetti at the moment, there might not be anyone in Parliament left without one. I mean, I'd personally, I'm not particularly encouraged by any Labour figure in terms of leadership credentials at the moment. I would say possibly Andy Burnham, although the problem is he's not in Parliament at the moment. But I think he probably does get it in terms of what the Labour Party needs to do to reconnect with the working class. So the sooner Andy gets back into Parliament, the better, I think.
Well, send us your views. If Sir Keir does go, who would you like to see leading the Labour Party? But coming up, we're joined on the sofas by broadcasting legend Alastair Stewart. But up first, here is your latest news.
Good morning, it's 11:34. I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. Sinn Féin's Vice President Michelle O'Neill says the party's victory ushers in a new era for Northern Ireland. The party won 27 seats in the election, overtaking the DUP, which dropped to 25. The results mark the first time that a nationalist or Republican party will form the largest grouping in Stormont. Secretary of State Brandon Lewis has called on the parties to form an executive as soon as possible. Senior Tories are accusing Sir Keir Starmer of hypocrisy as details emerged into allegations that he broke lockdown rules last year. The Mail on Sunday has published a leaked memo which appears to suggest a beer and curry event attended by the Labour leader and his deputy Angela Rayner was pre-planned. Sir Keir insists no lockdown rules were broken. However, police in Durham are investigating. He's resisting calls to resign, despite previously saying the Prime Minister should step down over parties at number 10. Boris Johnson says he'll deliver a so-called Super 7 of Brexit bills in the Queen's speech on Tuesday, which he says will cut red tape inherited from the EU. The Prime Minister told the Sunday Express the new laws range from data reform to financial services, allowing Britain to, quote, thrive as a modern, dynamic and independent country. He's also expected to unveil measures to help struggling town centres, including plans to force landlords to rent out empty shops. President Zelensky says all 300 women, children and elderly people have been rescued from the Azovstal steelworks in Mariupol. He says the second stage of the evacuation will now focus on removing wounded members of the Ukrainian military. Civilians and fighters have been trapped for weeks in what has become the last holdout for Ukrainian forces in the city. On TV, online and on DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Stay with us. The political correction will return.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates and strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle, and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to The Political Correction, and as is becoming a regular feature, we're joined now in the studio by broadcasting legend Alistair Stewart to talk about what's coming up on his show at 12 o'clock.
Watcha.
Alistair, come on.
I loved your conversation about schools.
Oh, yeah.
And I think you're 100% right. Social engineering and education, absolutely bonkers and crazy.
Don't feed his ego too much. All of these have been Paul's right today, praising him. We can't have too much of that going on.
In favour of him?
Yeah.
Oh, you want to fight back on that?
No,
she does. Trust me.
Come on, Alistair.
It's VE Day,
it is.
which a number of people have commented on. Oddly enough, not that much in the newspapers, curiously enough.
It's not a big anniversary today, though, is it? If it was 75.
No, indeed, it's. I could do it quickly enough, but 73, 74, something like that, yeah. But the thing that struck me, and we've talked about it on Alistair Stewart and Friends a number of times, how so many of the great institutions internationally have fallen short in the context of the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Yeah.
And all of those great institutions, including the United Nations, NATO itself, and actually if you track it from the Iron, Steel and Coal Federations through to the European Union, EEC, they all came out of the settlement having defeated fascism. Now let's build a better world. And although it wasn't the war to end all wars, that was supposed to have been 1914-18 war, I think a lot of people, my parents' generation included, thought that it had done enough to stop that kind of nonsense happening again. So we've invited Chris Parry, who's the retired Navy, one of my favourite military commentators, who worked in NATO, worked at Ministry of Defence at the highest possible level, to reflect on unfinished business, as it were. Rory McCallion, who's an old mate of mine going way, way back, who writes brilliantly about business, industry, innovation, creation, what have you, and the challenges that we suddenly... How many of us really knew how reliant Germany was on Russian oil and the rest of Europe, and ourselves to a lesser extent? Supply chains disrupted. Did you know most of the bread you eat was made from wheat that came from... there's a whole range of stuff, and we're taking a political view on it as well. And we are reflecting on what you've been chatting about with our lovely mutual friend Arlene about Northern Ireland a little bit. The numbers there, I think Arlene's got a point, actually, are intriguing, that if you crunch them all together, it does tell a slightly different story to the headlines in one or two of the newspapers. And then finally, we've got the great Sir John Curtis, as I always call him, the number cruncher.
I'm very envious.
But I want...
That's a coup.
Well, he's a great get because he just does it calmly. He doesn't have an axe to grind. He's one of the most experienced people in...
And no one's going to say no to you if you invite them, so let's be honest. It's like having a garden party invitation from the Queen, isn't it? It's one of those things you just have to go to.
Doing it.
Apparently so. No, you're going to stand in by all accounts.
I've got a great picture of my daughter attending a garden party. It was actually a Duke of Edinburgh's awards thing, and in the background's Hugh Edwards, which we quite like. But can I go back to your education thing, because I do genuinely feel very strongly about it. Our youngest son chopped and changed a few schools for various reasons, and he's fine. He absolutely came good, and he's doing brilliant. He's actually in a show jumping competition as we speak.
Fantastic.
But at one point, we were looking at a school in Hampshire, quite a smart, fee-paying private school, not grammar like you, but a private school, which I went to as well because my dad was in the Air Force. And we made our pitch to the headmaster, who then sort of turned rather haughtily to our son and said, "So tell me, why do you want to come to this school?" And our son said, "I don't." And my wife and I kind of drew a deep breath, and he said, "I don't really want to come to a school where it matters more how much your dad earns, what car your mum's got, and what have you. I just want a school where I'm going to be happy." And he ended up his educational days at Eggers State School in Alton, Hampshire, and they did a brilliant, brilliant job. It's all about horses for courses, not social engineering.
No, I think
Exactly right.
I think that's very
And
true.
down to quality of teachers as well. I mean, private schools do attract some blooming good teachers, as do grammars, but there are some incredible teachers in some of those toughest state schools who really inspire the kids and really drive them and drive their aspiration.
Yeah, and I think it's also worth remembering, which a number of people don't often admit to, is that there is no generality about private education, because my eldest son went to Winchester College, which is 99.9% academic. They don't even do common entrance. They have their own entrance exam, and they are self-confessed an academic elite. Eton's different. That is about social engineering, but from a very different angle. There's also a whole army of private schools out there that do not deserve to be in business, are taking money hand over fist from people, and frankly, not doing a great job.
And do you think that you know, we touched on it during our debate earlier, that some of those private schools, even the not so good ones, have perhaps been able to flourish as a result of the abolition in most areas of grammar schools? So because they're out.
No, I heard what Arlene was saying about her own experience.
In
in conversation with you. And again, I was bang on about my kids, but I'm very proud of what they all do. But my daughter is a teacher and is heavily involved in a private education group now, and planning new schools and what have you. And to her, it is all about ethos. It's about discipline, behaviour. It's about inventiveness, open minds. It's not just about SATs tests and following a strict curriculum. And that's what really good education is about. And I think 9 times out of 10, that is what folk who can afford it, and let's not avoid the elephant in the room, those that can afford it or pass an exam to get into a grammar school, as Arlene was saying, that's what they're going for. And it's not leafy suburbs and stuff like that, or I have a smart tie and I wear a boater in the summer. It's about education, discipline, attitude, ethos, and get that right, and you'll have a queue as long as your arm.
Exactly. I think that attitude point's really important. Well, Alistair, thank you so much. And guys, do tune in 12 o'clock. Once you finish with the political correction, don't go anywhere, because the fabulous Alistair is going to be on air talking about some pretty interesting topics, as always. Now, the mother of baby P, who died in 2007 after suffering horrific abuse at the hands of his mother, her partner and his brother, is set to be released on parole following a controversial decision by the Parole Board, despite the Justice Secretary, Dominic Raab, appealing to the Parole Board to reconsider. The news has provoked strong reactions from the public, with many demanding she never be released. So does this decision raise questions about the leniency of child abuse sentences and indeed the state of the justice system as a whole? Well, joining us now to discuss this is Paula Hudgell, who herself adopted an abused child and has campaigned ever since for increased sentences for child abusers. Paula, thank you for joining us this morning. I suppose my first question is, what did you make of the Parole Board's decision?
Good morning. Yes, I mean, the Parole Board's decision was absolutely ludicrous. I mean, they never took on board the government's advice to reconsider it. I mean, anybody who can abuse or kill a child should never be released back into society. So, yeah, absolutely appalled.
And can you tell us a little bit about your work and what inspired you to get involved?
Yeah, so obviously we adopted Tony. He came to us as a foster baby, but he was left on death's door by his birth parents. He had horrific injuries. How he survived, nobody really knows, but the incredible NHS worked tirelessly on him for 3 months. His injuries happened before he was 6 weeks old, and sadly he lost both of his legs. So since his birth parents, after us pushing and pushing for a conviction, they were sentenced to the maximum sentence of 10 years. And the maximum sentence at the time, if a child had died, was only 14 years, which again seems ludicrous. So we campaigned for Tony's Law, which received royal assent within the last week. And Tony's Law has now increased the maximum penalties for child cruelty offences for causing and allowing death of a child or a vulnerable adult from 14 years to life now. And if the child causing or allowing physical harm to a child, vulnerable adult, from 10 years to 14 years if they survive.
Well, it's really an incredible campaign that you ran. I mean, I had a lot of your kind of things across my desk in my role as an MP. I guess final question is, do you think, I guess what message would you want to give to the Parole Board if you could speak directly to them about the decision around Baby P?
Just to reconsider, anybody who commits such a vile act like that, should never be freed. And these increases in sentences now will make a huge difference. And if they'd been in place when Connolly was sentenced, then obviously she wouldn't be freed. It just shows how important Tony's Law is. And OK, she'll be on strict conditions when she's released and monitored. But if her licence ends, she'd be free to do anything. And that's why we're also calling for a child cruelty register, which at the moment nothing exists like that.
Well, honestly, Paula, thank you for coming and sharing your experience today, and thank you for the incredibly successful campaign that you've run. I know how tirelessly you've worked on this, so thank you for all of your efforts.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, lots of you have been getting in touch, as ever, about the many things that we have been discussing. We've got Malcolm here on party leadership, who said, I'd love to see Penny Mordaunt lead the Conservatives and Angela Rayner for Labour. PMQs would be fabulous.
And Marianne says, you don't see much in the way of proper debate in Parliament these days. It's all backbiting and pettiness. No wonder less people are voting. Beergate is a matter of hypocrisy more than anything else. That's why it's all blown up.
Arlene?
Yeah, and Linda says, I'm a big supporter. This is back to the grammar school piece. I'm a big supporter of grammar schools, and they should be in every area. That's the way to benefit lower income households.
We've got more of you getting in touch about who you'd like to lead the Labour Party. Gillian says Andy Burnham for me, agreeing with you there, Paul.
Yeah, Martin says the next Labour leader needs to be a woman. I would suggest Lisa Nandy. Kind of goes back to what we've been talking about throughout the show, really, about social engineering and quotas and so on. I mean, I have the old-fashioned view, the person who's best equipped for the job should be the Labour leader, whether that's man, woman or anything else. Not that there can be anything else, of course.
I agree. I kind of get it, though. I think it is interesting that Labour, deems itself as this really progressive party and yet hasn't yet managed to elect a female leader. So I sort of get it, but like you, I hate quotas and all of that sort of nonsense. Arlene?
Yeah, so Corinne disagrees. She says Andy Burnham would be the fall of Labour. Come to Manchester and look at what he's done to the city. The main artery has been closed in the city and most businesses have gone. It's in ruins.
And we've got Paul, who says if Starmer and Rayner both receive fixed penalties, then they should both stand in Parliament and apologise. Boris Johnson stood and owned his indiscretion. If the Prime Minister hasn't resigned despite being the instigator of the laws surrounding lockdown, then neither should Starmer, who voted for them. I suppose the difference, though, is that it was Starmer calling for the PM to resign over, breaking lockdown rules. So there's that, potential hypocrisy there if he declines to do the same.
And Carl says there is no obvious replacement for Keir Starmer. A dark horse for me and an impressive Labour MP is Stephen Kinnock, could follow in his father's footsteps. I see him as someone with potential. I mean, I quite like Stephen as an MP. He wrote and he edited an interesting book about cosmopolitans and communitarians and how the Labour Party had been captured by the former and hadn't really paid enough attention to the latter. So I think he's a decent shout.
And Arlene, final one from you.
Yes. Adrian is very worried about the fact that Paul Embry could be the next leader. He says, good God, no. As a lifelong Conservative Party supporter, the last thing we need is an intellectual, charismatic, voter-friendly leader of the opposition like Paul. Life is difficult as a Tory at the moment, as it is.
Yeah.
Oh, it definitely is.
Great sense of humour, wonderful personality, all of that sort of thing as well.
And a fantastic ego to go with it as well. Now, turning over to sport, we're at the sharp end of the football season, and in the Premier League last night, Liverpool's hopes for the quadruple were scuppered by Tottenham. Me personally, I'm just delighted Sheffield United have made it through to the Championship playoffs. But let's get more from our very own Aidan McGee. Aidan, what's going on?
Well, I just want to talk about Paul Embry first of all. He didn't mention his football career, of course. He had a good.
Of course.
I've got photos. I've got photos. I'll send them through to you after the show.
Any colour? Any in colour?
Wearing a Millwall tracksuit.
Any in colour?
Aren't they shocking?
No. Listen. It was a fantastic. It's an ongoing fantastic weekend in the Premier League. We saw Liverpool take on Tottenham yesterday. That was a standout game of yesterday. 7:45 kickoff, unusually late on a Saturday, but it really didn't disappoint. I mean, it was Liverpool looking a little bit laboured from their exertions in midweek in the Champions League. They went to Villarreal. They were given a real test in the first half, weren't they, Paul, against Villarreal? They were 2-0 down, so the tie was levelled. They'd had to turn it around by scoring 3 in the second half, and just the emotional weight on the players has obviously carried into Saturday, because you can't really rest players when you've got 2 massive games. You know, you have a squad, obviously, but you want your best players playing both games, and they almost lost it. They had to wait until, I think it was, 6 or 7 minutes from the... No, it wasn't. It was about 15 minutes from the end to get an equaliser against Tottenham. Tottenham went there and got a point. The point not much use to them either, really, although it was a great performance. Very few teams get a point at Anfield, but it just means they've conceded a little bit of ground on Arsenal. We played today against Leeds. But in terms of Liverpool, they missed.
It's game over, really, isn't it, in terms of the Premier League? You can't really see Manchester City faltering.
I said that in January when Man City were 14 points clear, and they surrendered that lead. So, look, we could see City's experience in midweek in Europe, and that was more recent as well because it was Thursday. That could have a greater weight on them than even Spain had on Liverpool, because they were 1-0 up. They were cruising against Real Madrid. Real Madrid didn't even have a shot on target. And then we got to, the last few moments of the game, and Real Madrid turned it around and, of course, won it in extra time. So, but Newcastle at home, Newcastle have been a bit inconsistent, much improved in January after spending 83 million quid, which always helps, but they've been inconsistent in the last month or so. But I fancy City to win that. And, of course, Arsenal have a huge wide-open door today against Leeds. But we must touch on Manchester United yesterday. Goodness me, 4-0 down at Brighton.
I only caught the first half and it was...
Yeah, I mean, again, it goes back to... I mentioned it earlier on. I just don't think a team can ever be effective when you know that the manager is leaving. Even if you suspect the manager is leaving, it's not a good situation. But when you know from January that the guy's only going to be there until the summer. I remember 2002, 20 years ago, Sir Alex Ferguson, one of the greats, announces in December that he's leaving the club at the end of the year. Their title challenge, I wouldn't say capitulated, but they definitely lost ground on Arsenal and allowed Arsenal to win their first title in 4 years that year. And so it makes a big difference. It just looks like some of them are giving up the ghost. And whoever goes in there has got an enormous job on their hands, haven't they?
I mean, I remember Gary Lineker, and I think he was right. I remember him saying that footballers don't play for clubs, they play for managers. And if you've got a manager who kind of inspires you and a manager who gives you confidence, a manager who you want to play for, then it can improve your performance compared to if you're playing under someone who, as you say, isn't going to be around for very long, so you don't necessarily feel that same obligation, or someone who you don't particularly warm to. So not having that stability and not having a manager who's got the dressing room I think is key at the moment.
It was like the new Labour cabinet when they knew Tony Blair was leaving. They kind of gave up the ghost and started
on the
spending money left, right,
on the beach.
So
Brighton Beach.
We've not got long left. I just want to talk about Maradona's shirts.
Yeah, that was incredible. So Steve Hodge took the shirt in the second half of that game in June '86 in Mexico. It was probably the shrewdest move he's made in his life. He had a really good career, Steve Hodge, but he didn't quite. You can see the pictures there of the shirt. That shirt actually wasn't on Argentina's list of kits on the day. They actually went out to a sports shop and got some generic Le Coq Sportif shirts and put the Argentina badge on it.
Oh my God.
Maradona said that if we play in, he didn't fancy his chances of beating England if they're playing in a similar coloured kit, because England were wearing white, Argentina would have been wearing light blue and white stripes. And they said, and Maradona looked at that shirt and thought it was beautiful. They had to put the badge on it because it wasn't official. But they said,
and you said that was on the day?
That was on the day, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Peter Reid,
he said we'll beat England in that kit.
Peter Reid, who played for England on that day and was supposed to be marking Maradona, went into a museum and he had a picture taken next to it a few years later and tweeted, "This is the closest I've ever got to this shirt."
I know.
Which, if you watch the game, which I did, I was in tears as an 11-year-old.
I had a Terry Fenwick shirt from that game for a brief time.
I remember you saying.
Yeah, I gave it back to the Sun. It was the right thing to do. But Steve Hodge had a great career, but didn't probably make the money that would anywhere near the money that they made now. But he's got his comeback now, that's for sure.
Well, there we go. Well, guys, as ever, thank you so much for joining us this Sunday morning. You've been watching and listening to The Political Correction. But join us next Sunday at 10 a.m. for 2 hours of discussion, debate and analysis of the week's biggest political stories. But up next, we've been talking to him already. We know what's coming up. It is the wonderful Alastair Stewart. So don't go anywhere. You've just got time for a cuppa. See you soon.
Looking ahead to today's weather, and the UK will be dry and bright across much of the country with any low cloud quickly clearing. Let's take a look at the details. By lunchtime, there'll be plenty of sunshine across southwest England, though some low cloud may linger along the south coast at times, temperatures rising to 16 or 17 Celsius. There'll be lots of strong May sunshine